Hello, everyone. My name is Francisco Godoy Tena, and I teach translation interpreting at the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid. The title of my presentation is The Use of Flipped Classrooms, Genially, and Moot courses in English-Spanish translation and interpreting courses, a practical guide into legal translation. First of all, I would like to thank all the organizers and sponsors of this important and interesting event called Tercer Congreso Internacional de Innovación en las Docencias e Investigación de las Ciencias Sociales y Jurídicas. To start with, I will explain briefly what the content of this presentation is. I will start with basic notions of translation and interpreting of legal translation, then the distinction between common law and civil law, legal translation in class, theoretical and practical studies, initial considerations for legal translation classes, and then I'll move on to the innovation in classes such as flipped classrooms, Genially, and Moot courses. Then I will explain how we can use flipped classrooms, Genially, and Moot courses in translation and interpreting courses, and then finally some conclusions. Well, we need to consider that legal translation is a specialized translation, and because of that, we need to be aware of the complexity of the legal terminology. It's hard to understand, not only in the case of the same legal family, trying to understand the complex terminology that law has, but also the comparison with other legal families. That's why the legal translation classes should be meaningful and with a variety of certain activities. Because of that, the students, translation interpreting students, should be aware of these important terms in legal or within the legal context. And that could be done thanks to the use of many legal documents. Every translation class should start with an introduction of the legal families, especially the ones that we are using in our working languages, the ones that we're translating. Then some basic notions, and then move on to more complex ones. Then we can apply the innovation techniques to use those terminology in context. And then finally, possible conclusions in class. And then we can open a debate. One of the initial or starting points of every legal class in translation, interpreting, or even in law classes should be the comparison between two or more legal families. In this case, the one that we are dealing with here in this study is the distinction between common law and civil law. Common law, origined in England and spread to other countries in different centuries, is based on an uncodified type of legal system where there is no a particular codification. There is no a code or a certain amounts of codes, at least in the same amount as what we will see in civil law. That is why we cannot find a compilation of legal rules, and common law is therefore based on precedent. That's why we have to be aware of the importance of judges, something that we will see later on in the Moot courses of our classes. In the case of civil law, also called continental law, whose origin is from Roman law, It's quite the opposite. It's a highly codified legal system in which there is quite a good deal of possible compilations of rules and codes. And because of that, judges apply those provisions of those codes to, for example, judgments. In the case of translator and interpreters, we should be aware of certain aspects in this case. First of all, in the case of Spain, we have Section 231 of the Ley Orgánica. In this case, the importance of interpreters at court, the same in Section 440 of the Ley Enjuiciamiento Criminal. In the United Kingdom, you're entitled to have an interpreter if you are deaf or have difficulty hearing, if you want to speak Welsh, and also if you cannot understand English. This is the possible case of the website in the UK, and this is a case of the official website of Traductores e Intérpretes in Spain and also in the US. Then we have to be careful in the case of how to establish the theoretical framework of legal translation and interpreting courses. In every class, we should have two important fields, some theoretical classes, normally at the beginning of the course, when we can introduce social, cultural, and legal terminology in class. In this case, we can introduce the distinction between common law and civil law that I explained just a few minutes ago, and then introduce them by means of flipped classrooms, something that I will explain later on a bit more in detail. Then we can move on to a more practical time or more practical classes, and that would be just probably 2-3 weeks later. So the whole course will be mainly practical for translator and interpreters. In this case, we have to take into account, again, the use of introduction exercises with means of terminology in both languages. In my case, English and Spanish. We can use the innovative application or Genially, which is a very interesting platform for that. And then also we can introduce mock court classrooms with means of Moot court that will be really at the middle and end of legal translation and interpreting courses, so they can see everything in context. Well, first of all, we can start with the use of flipped classroom. What is a flipped classroom? Well, the origin can be traced back to 2006. There were two teachers, Mr. Beckman and Mr. Sams, who started recording chemistry lectures so students can see those lectures beforehand, and then they could come and they could go to those classes with the theory that they have already learned with those videos. In the case of legal classrooms, we can apply those flipped classrooms by means of different types of materials. Here, I will give you some notions, but I will explain more later on in further studies. First of all, obviously, one of the most important is the phase of videos and debates, basically to introduce different terminology based on courts and tribunals for different countries, from the States, the UK, Spain, etc. Also main distinction, the case of barrister, fiscal del Estado. In that case, we can also introduce some interviews of those different legal figures. Then I would encourage in classes to introduce different articles so they can get some basic notions of legal basics in different countries. For example, the distinction of Spanish and US constitutions, Also distinction between common law and um, legal and sharing, yes. Then we can move on to Genially, which is a very recent technique and innovative way of teaching in class. It was created in Spain in 2015, and well, it was really a good way, as it we can see that in the lines that you can see on the screen. Is the good way of making communication interactive. Yeah. Well, here we can have an example of that, where we can introduce certain kinds of presentations, gamifications, guides, and videos, and many others, to introduce legal terminology in classes. Once again, not only in case of translation interpreters, which is my presentation, but also in legal classes, and also in international legal classes as well, and in bilingual classes of law. For example, here I introduced a possible exercise when you can introduce the term barrister, and then you can have different possible ways of defining that term. Obviously, thanks to flipped classrooms, students are aware of this distinction. And then, of course, importance of possible PowerPoint presentations of all sorts and gamifications. In the case of moot courts, that could be at the end of the courses. Also code mooting is really interesting for law students, but also can be implemented for legal translation classes and also for international classes of law. Well, and it could be really, as I said before, at the end of the translation interpretation courses, they can watch videos, even at the beginning of the course, so they're aware of they're going to see, and they are going to be aware of, I'm going to participate at the end of the class. And it's really important to understand the legal issues of this English and Spanish term, see the comparison and distinction. Additionally, of course, as it's part of a court, they can actually improve their oral and translation skills. In that case, it could be good for translation and interpreting. They can improve and increase their register. Sometimes they should be aware that they need to increase and enhance their possible register in legal English and Spanish too, so they can actually translate and interpreting efficiently in every document. And then, of course, they can see in context the comparison that is so at the very beginning with flipped classrooms with the common law and civil or continental law. This could be one example. In this case, we can have federal common law. Yeah, in this case, we can talk about US law, rule of decision, etc., etc. So as possible conclusions, well, it's really important for translator and interpreters, well, to use it for possible English and Spanish documents in context. Then we can introduce the innovative techniques in translation technique classes. We introduce certain aspects, for example, flipped classrooms, Genially, and Moot courts. Remember, flipped classrooms in the case of more theoretical, Genially and Moot courts more practical. And then we can introduce other innovative uses that can be implemented, and that would be further studied and explained in the written document after this presentation. And then, well, another important aspect is that the legal translation should be really meaningful and with a variety of possible activities for students of all sorts. Well, once again, I would like to thank the Congress that took us the opportunity to share our ideas and all the organizers of this important event. Thank you very much for all of you. And well, if you want to give me any further comments or any questions, you have my email. You can write me in English or Spanish, and I will answer you as soon as possible. Thank you very much.